Okay. Hi, Richard. How are you?
Good, thanks. How are you, Doug?
Doing great. Thank you for coming on this show. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you for having me.
When we received your bio, I was immediately fascinated because serial killers and that kind of crime has been something that I've always been sort of morbidly fascinated by.
Yes.
And as a teenager, when I was growing up, it seemed to be the height of the serial killers. They seemed to be all around at that time, namely Jeffrey Dahmer, John Wayne Gacy, Richard Ramirez, Ted Bundy.
Ted Bundy, yeah.
There was a whole bunch of them that were running around in the sort of late 70s, 80s period. And now it seems to have kind of died off. Do you think the internet kind of stopped a lot of those people just because there's cameras everywhere?
No, I don't think so. There's probably still serial killers running around, but the interest in true crime has been so broadened. But the interest in serial killers, I think is still pretty intense. Interesting with the research shows that women are particularly interested in looking at shows about serial killers, but it's a sort of a way of coping with it in fear of as a way of survival to try to preempt uh, what to do. Know what to do if you're ever kidnapped. But I think true crime and forensic work, just with the internet and podcasts seem to be just very a great interest to people.
Well, I know the interest of all of that is, but it just seems to me that there aren't as many actual serial killers. I guess that's what I was trying to say, as there
Yeah,
were back then.
there has been so and many, at least in the media, identified. Now, whether that means there's been a reduction in them, I'm not sure. I know about 10 years ago, I spoke to a FBI agent about this, and he said that there are serial killers out there and they're being tracked by the FBI that the public simply doesn't know about. Um, Now, how many there are, whether it's reduced in number than there was 10 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, I'm not sure. But I would think I don't see why that would be the case.
Yeah, I don't think something like that is so ingrained in people's human nature, yeah, that technology is not going to change it probably one way or the other.
No, no, you would think on a rational level that with all the technology, someone might be more cautious, but that's not the psychology of someone who's a serial killer. They're more impulsive, they're more internally driven by something that they're going to act out regardless of the risk. They're going to just try to minimize it. And the brighter they are and the more calculating they are, the the more successful they'll be. But ultimately, and basically, I think you're right. Human nature hasn't changed. Anyone who's destined to be a serial killer is going to find a way around it, or thinks that he could find a way around it. And I say he because there's generally mostly males.
Have there ever been any female serial killers?
I think so, but it's very rare, very rare.
Yeah,
Men are the dominant killers.
and the profile in the United States is predominantly white males and generally from 20s to 40, 50 years old, something like
Yes,
that.
yeah, 20 young men, young middle-aged men, whites. It's kind of different from the even prison population. Serial killers frequently don't have a history don't have a long history, at least, of crime. They're not easily identified. They're more akin to people who are what are called successful psychopaths. What I mean by that, successful, they haven't been identified or caught. They haven't been criminally charged of anything, but they're in the community.
Right.
Most The data shows there's about, it varies maybe from 1 to 4%, whatever different uh, research programs on this, but about, so let's say 2% of the population are psychopathic. But that doesn't mean they're all in jail. You have a large part of this successful psychopaths in the professions you might expect them to be in, where there's power and money, politics, the professions, law, uh, business, corporate America. A lot of the white crime is perpetrated by people who are successful. Bernie Madoff might be a
Perfect
prime
example. Yeah.
You would never know it from, his external profile. Whereas a lot of people, men who commit violence, you can, but from their past, you can sort of identify this person is at risk. That's a lot of what I do. For example, in my evaluations as a forensic psychologist, I'll evaluate someone, for example, who killed, one case in particular I talk a little bit about in my book, as he was breaking up with his girlfriend, and as he was leaving, they had one of their arguments, and it was in the kitchen, which is always dangerous because there's so many weapons in the kitchen. Well, there was a block of knives on the counter. He grabbed one, stabbed her in the chest. Now he had he wasn't even psychopathic, this individual, but he had a history of impulsiveness, barroom fights, that kind of thing. Fractured early life, low self-esteem, and the girlfriend he was with was kind of career person, very bright, very articulate, but could be very cutting. And this guy was very vulnerable to his esteem. So when she started attacking him verbally and his sexual prowess, he's leaving out the door. The relationship was ending. He, in an impulsive way, he killed her. But he was someone who you could predict has potential for violence because of his past. On the other hand, some of these serial killers or successful psychopaths that you wouldn't know from their past behavior. So it's why it's hard to identify or find this a serial killer. They blend in. There's no
Oh yeah.
there's no paper trail of their past, whereas there is with some of these career criminals or people who are impulsive or antisocial, because right from early on you can look at them and they have histories from their teenage years of behavior problems and acting out. It's not the case with the serial killer or some of these more successful psychopaths. So it's a problem.
Well, even to the opposite degree with somebody like John Wayne Gacy, who had his picture taken with Rosalind Carter, who was First Lady at the time, and he was involved in all sorts of sort of civic, local government, community stuff, and he was, by all accounts, a pillar of his community.
Yeah, that's a lot of these successful psychopaths. I have another case I have from my book, and he's the central character in the chapter on Heart of Darkness. He killed his wife, and to cover it up, killed his child. Now, that's pretty vicious and calculating, cold. But he was, I wouldn't say he was a pillar of the community. He wasn't having interviews with the president's wife, First Lady, but he was a very successful businessman, salesman. When you dig deeper into it, you see the problems that he had. But on the surface, you would have never known it. No problems, a very minor problem with the law when he was younger, one instance, but there's not someone you would expect something like this to happen. This is probably more like we see so many times when something really horrendous happens and the news media interviews a neighbor and they say, I don't understand it. He was always out with his kids. He was waving. He seemed, I don't know what went wrong. It doesn't make sense. Well, it doesn't make sense externally. Because there's a lot of times not a rational reason for it, an external rational reason. There's an internal logic or drivenness that's part of their makeup and their mental state. So it's not something that's obvious, like you would see, for example, with someone who has a schizophrenic illness, where every 3 months, 6 months, 8 months, a year, they go off medication, and then they do something. They become paranoid. They become suspicious. They scream at a neighbor. What are you doing to me? Get paranoid. It's obvious. But with some of these more, with the serial killers or these psychopathic people, it can be very charming and it can be very bright, but very calculating, very cruel, and very sadistic.
I was going to ask you about what do you do with these people, and I wanted to bring up a different group of people as well, and we'll kind of put them all together here. We talked about serial killers and psychopaths, and then there's been a lot in the news about pedophiles, about people who sexually abuse children, which I'm sure you've had to deal with in your career, I would assume, yeah?
Yes, I've done a lot of evaluations of
Okay,
sex offenders.
of sex offenders, right. So I may be jumping right to the end, but is there a cure for anything like this, or do you have to take it on a case-by-case basis, or do basically these people just belong locked up and away from society?
Yeah,
Because there's no...
yeah, it's a real good question, Doug, because I think there's confusion about this. There's a difference between a sex offender and a pedophile. A pedophile is someone who their dominant interest is in children, pre-teen children, usually of the opposite sex or the same sex. Someone who is driven to that side with that sexual preoccupation, there's no cure for. Some of them, now most of the sex offenders that I've evaluated, I must have done, for years I was doing extensive testing on sex offenders. I must have done over 1,000 sex offender evaluations. A small portion of those were actual pedophiles. Sex offenders, sex offense happens for all kinds of reasons. Impulsiveness, with not with children. It'd be a sex offender. The minor could be 14, 15, 16. Some of the girls are, girls can be 12 but have mature bodies, and you have a sex offense of a boyfriend who's living with the teenager's mother, and something happens. Now, someone like that is usually more impulsive. They use poor judgment. They're psychologically immature, but they're not pedophilic. Someone like that, you get into a sexual offense program. You help them therapy with impulses. You help them with getting a greater grasp of empathizing with what they did, the terrible destructiveness of it. A lot of those people are could be helped, especially if the offense happens when they were young. They were young men. By the time they get older, and with treatment, a large portion of those could be helped. Pedophiles, a different story. They're driven to have sexual contact with children. Some of them too are disgusted with themselves and want restraint. But if you get someone who's a pedophilic but antisocial, manipulative, they're dangerous around kids, and they really have to be contained.
Well, specifically the Catholic priest scandal and the Boy Scouts leader scandal, that's the big ones in the United States right now, and there were hundreds, possibly thousands.
Yes, I think that's a real issue, and the problem is that, like with Boy Scouts, it's easy to go under the radar, and there's a certain portion of men who are going to be drawn to those activities because they're going to have access to young boys or young girls, and be able to groom them.
Right, right.
So that's a dangerous thing. Or even, we have to say most Boy Scout leaders aren't pedophiles, but even if you get a small percentage of them, that can wreak horrendous destruction.
Well, it has, because by all accounts, the Boy Scouts of America Association is bankrupt, and they've had to pay hundreds of millions of dollars. I mean, I was a scout up to Weeblos back in the 70s. And there was, nobody talked about this when at that time, but it just seems like it exploded
Yeah,
at one point.
that's really good that it's now there's a consciousness of it, so people
Right.
are more aware of it. And the Catholic, look at the Catholic
And the
Church. I
Catholic
mean, the only
Church,
reason
right.
they're not bankrupt is because they have so much money.
Right, exactly.
But that scandal is international, uh, and in some other countries that are very Catholic, it's even more recent because it's been so hard to swallow, so hard to face. And the hypocrisy is so much greater there. You have people who are supposed to be the moral pillars, ultimately, the direct line to the Almighty, and they're abusing children. I mean, it's. I went to Catholic elementary school, so I mean, I don't recall, and I don't know any of my friends who had any problems with the priests, but it is horrendous, and I have done a couple of evaluations of priests, not that had been accused of any kind of sexual misconduct, but as part of their entry into the seminary. Because there was a college in Southern California here where when these men finished their undergraduate, they would then go to seminary for to continue their training to become priests. And on a couple of occasions, I evaluated a couple of those guys, and they seem fine.
Okay.
But there's just so much more of a consciousness of this now that hopefully will reduce the risk and help identify priests that are potentially dangerous.
Well, that's true. I hope so too. And I suppose allowing them to be married might help, simply because
I
you're
think that
only.
would help tremendously.
Yeah, yeah,
That would be because right now it's just if you're truly pedophilic, that certainly could be in one of those professions or activities, with scouts or priesthood. It's just a perfect venue
exactly.
to begin grooming, and you have power,
Right.
especially as a priest.
We do have to wrap this up. We are out of time. Your book is called Decoding Madness, and do you have a website that you want to give out?
Yes, you can. My website is crimepsychologist.com, and you could look at my website. I have a blog that I have a lot of writings on there, and I have a page where you can purchase my book, or you purchase it anywhere in any of the venues: Barnes and Nobles, Amazon, the bookstores, brick and mortar stores.
Brick and mortar, yeah. Okay.
Still goes.
Well, Richard, thanks so much for coming on. This was an interesting conversation. I know we could have gone on, but we did run out of time. Thanks so